And yeah, and the context for this introductory slide, which I didn't tell your professor about, is in many ways I am probably going to be the strangest speaker you hear in law school, maybe the strangest speaker you've ever heard in any sort of educational setting, because among other things, I've got dog poop still smeared over my pants from being out in a field rescuing dogs just a couple weeks ago. I'm also just out of jail. One of the reasons I'm here is because the Dane County authorities were kind enough to release me from a jail cell. I'm also a convicted felon and have been incarcerated before. So some of the many reasons you might be asking yourself, what the hell is Justin doing? We're a law school, not a criminal enterprise, and he's inviting his criminal to come speak to in a law school. Well, it's partly because I think I have a very interesting answer to this question. Who writes the law? Anyone taking legislation or legal theory? Probably not. You're in your 1L year. Anyone read legislation or legal theory as an undergraduate? Who has an answer to this question? Who writes the law? What do you think?
Legislature?
Yeah, that's not a bad answer. But we live in a common law system, so who else writes the law? Judges? Yeah. Any other answers? Where does the Constitution come from? I guess technically it comes from a bunch of old white men in the 1700s, right? They wrote this document that is the law of the land and is actually the most fundamental law of the land. So those are all plausible answers. So who writes the law? Maybe it's judges, maybe it's the legislators, maybe it's the founding fathers. I have a different answer. Criminals. This is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek answer, but it's not entirely tongue-in-cheek, because if you look at kind of the legal theory behind democracy, the legal theory behind civil disobedience, what you find is some of the largest transformations in the legal system actually come from people who are breaking the rules. That includes our founding fathers. They were rebels. They broke the rules of the British Empire because they thought they were unfair. They created a new republic. And I'll just give you one example of how, in our work, we're breaking the rules to make new rules. So one of the questions that has been asked by not just animal advocates, but frankly, just human beings living our lives in the world is, what is the definition of cruel? And this actually comes up a lot in the context of animal abuse statutes. This, for example, is 951.02 of the Wisconsin Criminal Code, which indicates that it is a crime to treat an animal in a cruel manner. What does cruel mean? Well, for decades, animal advocates have been saying that the dogs being used in laboratories, confined in cages, force-fed laundry detergent, surgically mutilated without anesthesia, sometimes even injected with deadly pathogens like rabies. We've described this condition as cruel, and this is footage I shot myself inside a vivisection facility in Dane County, Wisconsin. I should have told you at the start of this brief chat that I am going to show you some stuff. It's not the worst stuff you'll see in terms of cruelty, but if you're extremely sensitive to this sort of thing, honestly, this might be a little luxury you must step out of, because I don't want to traumatize you. And totally fine. You can talk to me afterwards if you have any questions about any of this. So I'll just give you a moment. It's totally fine. Okay, so it's not that bad. We're not going to show any bloodshed, but we're going to show you the conditions dogs live in laboratories and breeding facilities across the country. When I walked into Ridgeland Farms, one of the largest breeding and research facilities in the nation, we had heard for years that animals were being improperly confined, denied proper socialization, treated in a cruel manner, in violation of Wisconsin law, and this is what we found. We saw thousands of dogs confined in crates like this. Some of these dogs, we later discovered, had been living in a cage like this for 7 years, for their entire lives in a 2-foot by 4-foot space, never stepping outside, never seeing the sun, never even feeling anything soft their entire lives. And our opinion was this was cruel. And we had a lot of backing for this. We had prominent animal welfare experts, among others, Jane Goodall support us and said, no animal should live in conditions like this. And I know how animals live. This is not how animals are supposed to live. We had veterinarians, including some of the most prominent veterinarians and animal scientists in the state of Wisconsin, a doctor named Patricia McConnell, who literally wrote the book on dog behavior, who said this is torture. You cannot force an animal to live like this for 7 years and not expect them to suffer from a psychotic breakdown, which is what this dog was experiencing. We even had former employees with us on this, saying, actually, we saw what we were doing, and every day we felt traumatized just by what we had to do to get a paycheck. And despite all of this, you know what the Wisconsin authorities did when we submitted to them evidence of what we thought was cruelty at Ridgeland Farms? You want to guess how they responded? Someone raise their hand. Come on. Back. That's exactly right. So they charged me with theft and burglary because, among other things, while we were documenting the facility with virtual reality cameras we had borrowed some from friends of mine in the Bay Area, we also took this beagle out of her cage because we saw her spinning there for 2 hours. We realized something was profoundly wrong with her. There was something wrong with her. Not only was she psychotically traumatized from living her entire life in a cage, but she was blind. She was trying to run from the things she was scared of, and she didn't even have the ability to see the world around her. So we took her out. They charged us with burglary and theft. We were facing potentially 15 years in prison. Actually, the clinic defended us, so thanks to Justin and Chris for stepping up to defend the 3 actives who were charged. And something pretty remarkable happened after this. Because while the authorities were telling us this isn't cruel, in fact, what you did was wrong, what the industry is doing is totally legit, it's normal, it's necessary, it's just part of biomedical science, within 1 year, approximately, of our trial that had been scheduled, we had turned the tables on the industry and a criminal probe started against Ridgeland Farms. This wasn't because the authorities actually changed their mind. They're still fighting us and saying this isn't cool, this is normal and necessary in the biomedical industry. It's because we had millions of people across the country sending emails, writing letters, making phone calls to the DA, the Attorney General, to everybody in the powers that be of the state of Wisconsin saying this is cruel. This is not okay to do to any sentient being. And the definition of cruelty in Wisconsin is now changing because we broke the law. But this isn't the only example. If you look through American history, there are many other examples of rule breakers becoming rule makers. Anyone know kind of American history and can identify this person? I'll give you a hint, women's rights. Susan B. Anthony. And do you know what Susan B. Anthony was most famous for in the 19th century? There was one moment that made her career. She became like basically a viral influencer because of one thing that she did. Exactly. She was told she was not a citizen who had privileges and immunities under the U.S. Constitution. And she said, that's bogus. I am a citizen. I'm a living being. I'm a human. I can think. I can vote. And if you tell me I'm not a citizen, I'm just not going to believe you. I'm going to go ahead and vote. They put her on trial, and she was actually convicted for trying to vote. And yet, just a generation later, the world had changed. We realized she was right all along. That women are, in fact, citizens who have the same privileges and immunities that the rest of us hold. So Susan B. Anthony was a criminal, and she wrote the law. She redefined the term citizen to make sure that 50% of the people in this room would have the rights you have today. Another example, which I'm sure all of you know, Rosa Parks. In the 1950s and 60s, even the Supreme Court of the United States had interpreted the term equal under the 14th Amendment, equal protection of the laws, as allowing for segregation, when it was literally just not equal, right? I mean, if you went onto a bus in Montgomery where Rosa Parks lived, she just could not sit in the seats that were designated for white people. The white people, in contrast, could totally sit on the black people's seats. It's a definition of not equal. But for 100 years since the Civil War, so many powerful people, old men wearing robes, had told them, in cases like Plessy versus Ferguson, no, you got to take this. It's going to be equal. And I don't care what you think. You're not going to get the same schools. You're not going to get the same rights. You can't even sit on a bus if we say you can't sit on a bus. And you're going to accept that and say that's equal. And Rosa Parks said, no, I'm not. I'm not going to accept that because it's not. What's equal is giving me the same seats that everyone else gets. And she sat in that seat. She was tried for breaking the law. And she was also convicted. She lost in court. And of course, the rest is history. Now all of us look back to Plessy versus Ferguson. Is anyone taking common law? It's just one of the most infamous cases in American history. We think to ourselves, how could intelligent people possibly believe this? But that only started that dialogue, that transformation, that evolution, that revolution, you might say, because someone was willing to break the law. And this is the most recent one. Any guesses as to who these people are? We could probably surmise a hypothesis based on just the image itself. You know what this is a historic moment in a very recent transformation. It's a 2015 Supreme Court case called Obergefell versus Hodges. You know that case? What is that case?
For gay marriage.
Gay marriage. Marriage became a constitutional right. But this was not always the case, right? Justin and I are old enough. I'm older than a lot of people think. I'm 44 years old. When I was growing up, honestly, I didn't even know anyone was gay. I didn't meet someone who was gay until I was in college. Everyone hid. You just couldn't be gay and be a normal person in American society. And now it's a constitutional right, but partly it happened because Janora Dancel and Nina Bayer in 1993 decided, you can't tell us what marriage is. You can't tell us that we don't love each other. We don't deserve to have a family, to have kids, to have the same legal rights that every straight couple gets. This is a marriage, and we're going to make this a marriage by walking right into the government buildings and signing that marriage certificate whether you like it or not. And they actually also lost their case over the long term. They won initially at the trial court, and then the Hawaii legislature, I think it was the legislature, it might have been a ballot initiative, I forget what it was. But the outcome in court was actually reversed after a massive number of appeals. But just 20 years later, after they won initially in 1996 in the trial court, in 2015, the Supreme Court of the United States decided that Bayer and Dancel were right. Marriage can be between two women. So again, criminals are the ones who are often writing the law. So I'm going to demonstrate to you now some examples of how animal rights activists are using their criminal law to push forward new and I think accurate interpretations of language that is affecting the condition of literally billions. This is not an exaggeration. There are 10 billion animals in confinement and exploitation in the United States every single year. And all of them suffer from abuse that would be unimaginable. Frankly, if you saw it on a street corner, if you saw it happening to a dog, if you saw it happening to even an insect, you'd probably be disturbed. But the law often doesn't reflect our moral intuitions or the common sense intuitions we have. And so one of the things we've done over the last 10 years is use civil disobedience and nonviolent direct action, breaking some of the rules to provoke attention, awareness, and transformation in these rules. And here's one example. This is a legal question that many animal advocates have been concerned about for many decades. Do you have a right to rescue animals from suffering and abuse? And there have been a lot of successful political campaigns, mostly focused on very narrow areas. So many of you have probably heard of these laws that have been passed that entitle you to break a window if a dog is trapped in a hot car, right? And you're often immunized from even civil liability. You don't have to even pay for the window because if somebody left their dog in a hot car, it's kind of their fault. I mean, it's not your fault for saving the dog, it's their fault for leaving the dog, right? So you're completely immunized from any sort of liability. Well, animal rights advocates like me believe this is a more general principle. It shouldn't just apply to a dog in a hot car. It should apply to a dog who's trapped in a dogfight ring. It should apply to a dog who's being tortured in a lab. It should apply to a chicken who's being scalded alive in a slaughterhouse. And if you're surprised by that last example, you shouldn't be. Because of the 9 billion chickens killed in the United States, plausibly 100 million are still conscious while being processed on the slaughter line. And I know this because we've done the investigations to show. So here's an example of the largest slaughterhouse in Western United States. It's called Foster Farms. And what routinely happens when you place undercover cameras inside these farms and slaughterhouses. So in the state of California, Penal Code 597 says that animals are not supposed to have any sort of unnecessary suffering. If you subject an animal to unnecessary suffering, that is a crime. This, in our opinion, is unnecessary suffering. And setting aside whether prosecutors are willing to enforce the law and prevent animals like this from literally being buried alive in landfills, we believe we have the right to take those animals out. If you're going to be so cruel to the animals that you will literally bury a living animal alive because she's too sick to stand and you don't have the time and the resources and the conscience to at least euthanize the animal before you throw them into a garbage bin, then we're just going to take them out. And that's exactly what activists have started to do. So my good friend Alexandra Paul, who's actually a client of the clinics as well, went outside this slaughterhouse after this investigation came out and said, no. We're not burying animals alive. We're not scalding them alive in slaughter tanks. If this company cannot care for the animals, then we're taking them out to receive the care they deserve. And that's what she did, and she did it completely openly. This is outside the very slaughterhouse I just showed you footage of. And this is Alexandra and Alicia Centurio, also a client in the clinic, openly, without covering their faces, taking 2 of these chickens out and then publishing it to the world. They posted on social media and said, this is why we did it. The authorities are not enforcing the law. They're not protecting the animals. This is unnecessary suffering. Don't let them tell you it's not, because no animal deserves to be buried alive. And every time an animal abuser gets away with a crime, we know our society has failed. So she went in and she did this. She was charged with petty theft, put on trial, and in a very surprising outcome, Chris was actually one of the lead counsels on this trial. And I think Chris and I actually were both a little skeptical, because this is not some progressive county in Denver or San Francisco. It's not New York City. This is Merced County, California, where Foster Farms, this slaughterhouse, is the biggest private employer in the county. You know, it's Trump-supporting county. It's a rural county where people work at farms and slaughterhouses. And in this rural county, when we made the argument that Alexandra Paul and Alicia Centurio had the right to rescue the animals, we won. A jury unanimously acquitted our clients and said, we want these animals alive. We don't want them buried alive. We want them just alive. And it was covered in the New York Times, which made the case that rescuing animals from cruelty should be legal. Again, breaking the rules is making the rules. Another example. They're animals, someone or something. So this is for those of you who are in property law, which is probably a lot of you. Are you guys taking property? Maybe first semester? You probably read Pearson versus Post. Iconic case about takings and who has the property right to the animals, right? And this is something you kind of take for granted in the law, that animals are just things, they're property that you can take, you can kill, you can use as you like. Well, some of us disagree. Certainly most Americans with dogs would disagree. Their dogs are things, right? In fact, Paul Bloom, a psychologist at Yale and the University of Toronto, has done studies finding that Americans actually would choose their dogs over a human being, pretty much even odds. If they're asked to choose, like I think the actual surveys, there's a boat that's sinking, your dog is on one of them, a human is the other, which do you save? It's a coin flip. So for most Americans, dogs are clearly not things. They're literally willing to sacrifice human life to save their dogs. But the industry does not feel this way, which is why the industry does things like this. Right? This is a photo taken from the largest pig factory farm in the United States, Circle 4 Farms, where animals are treated like things. What you see behind this piglet is her mother trapped in what's called a farrowing crate. This is a 600-pound animal, the size of 2 NFL linemen. She lives in a space approximately the size of a small bathtub her entire life. And her body breaks down, she's useless in the industry, and she's thrown away like a thing. Right? And what you're seeing here in this image is her teats that she's using to nurse her babies. She's breaking down. Year after year, 7 years of constant childbirth, 2.5 litters of piglets scrambling and fighting for her teats have shredded them to the point they're almost like a vampire octopus. They're treating animals like things. And what was particularly surprising about this photograph when we published it in the New York Times is that this wasn't even supposed to exist, because the company had claimed, oh, we're doing away with crates, don't worry. We've heard you loud and clear. And this happened back in 2006. They said, it's going to take some time, don't worry. We're listening to consumers. We know you don't like these animals treated like machines, so the pigs are going to be free. Just give us 10 years. And we went back in 10 years, in January of 2017. You want to know how many mother pigs we found outside of crates? Out of the 1.2 million pigs at Circle 4 Farms? You want to guess how many mother pigs did we see outside of crates? After they said, and their CEO even made a press release in January of 2017 saying, at Smithfield, we keep our promises. And we went and checked in on this promise. How many mother pigs do you think we saw outside of crates like this? Hazard a guess. What do you think? None. 0. We saw thousands on thousands of mother pigs trapped in 2-foot by 7-foot gestation crates, effectively metal tombs. They live in a coffin their entire lives. And babies like this, in some cases, starving to death because their mothers were so broken down from the constant toil and torment of a gestation or farrowing crate, they could no longer produce milk. And the industry wants us to just accept this. Animals are things. It's just a machine. Sometimes machines are going to break down. In fact, the definition of animal cruelty in Utah even excludes animals being raised pursuant to commonly accepted animal husbandry standards as animals at all. They're not even considered animals as long as they're raised pursuant to commonly accepted animal husbandry standards. Well, we disagreed, and we argued this in court. And this is the prosecutors, and actually, jumping ahead a little bit, after we published these photos, that piglet, I'll have you know, we got her out. We took 2 of these little piglets out. She was about half the size of the other piglets. Her face was covered in blood because she was nursing from that teat. The way piglets nurse, there's something called teat ordering, where all the piglets claim one teat. And if you happen to be a piglet who's claimed a defective teat like this, you're just going to starve to death, which happens to about 18% of all the piglets in factory farms. So 1 in 5 babies will just die, with starvation being one of the most common causes of death. But this baby didn't starve. We took her out. But again, instead of charging the company, because the industry said they were things, the government said they're just things. Look at the law. The law says it's not even an animal. It doesn't matter if you think they're an animal. They're not an animal. Because if they're raised in a factory farm, they just don't count as animals at all. We disagreed, and we fought this in court. This is the prosecutor's closing statement, literally his closing statement.
Imagine the use of the word rescue in some other context. Suppose you were in the grocery store and you saw a can with dents in it, and you thought to yourself, oh my goodness, that can has a dent. It has the potential of going bad. I better rescue that can, put it in my purse, take it out of the store.
So our odds in this case were considered longer than the odds in the Merced County case. I told you that Foster Farms, the poultry slaughterhouse that Chris and I represented Alexandra and Elysian, was the largest employer in Merced County. In this county, Beaver County, Smithfield was not just the largest employer, it was basically the only employer. 1 out of 3 people in the entire county worked for Smithfield. It's a county that's 90% Trump supporting. 90%. I didn't even know it got that high. Like, you just can't find anything where anybody's 90% in agreement on anything, much less Trump. In this county, 90% Trump support. And all of them are basically farmers. Everyone works in the farming industry. And I remember the day, a week before trial, when I took over the case. I decided to represent myself in this case. I did have an amazing attorney, Liz Hunt, who was just incredible and dynamic through the entire case. But I took the trial away from her a week before trial because I wanted to speak directly to the jury. And Liz begged me at the point of near tears because we were facing potentially decades in prison. It was a class 2 felony, right above murder, right? Or right below murder, I should say. She begged me and pleaded and said, this is a hopeless case. You have to take a plea bargain. Take whatever they're going to give you. Take a couple of years. Come back and fight another day. We fought this in court because we thought that animals are not things. And even in rural Utah, no one believes the Utah government when they try to tell us that animals are just things. You know what happened? Well, when we showed the jury clips like this, this is a clip of one of the little piglets we saved from Smithfield. And she had an injured foot that was swollen up to about twice its normal size. She was 1/3 the size of the other piglets because she was starving to death. You can see her holding her little foot up.
Poor sweetheart, your little foot hurts. Your little foot hurts, huh?
You try to adapt to the foot soak?
You know, I think we could probably do that in the.
So we played videos like this to the jury, and we said, animals aren't things. They're living beings. They deserve stewardship and kindness and care. And you know what this jury in southern Utah, 90% Trump supporting, 1/3 of them probably working for Smithfield, or at least their family working for Smithfield. The Smithfield employees were conflicted out. But anyone in Beaver County, Utah, or Washington County, Utah, probably had some connection to jury. You know what they said in their verdict in October 2022? What do you think they said? You look very concerned. What do you think they said?
That animals are more than things.
More than things.
Actual sentient beings.
That's exactly right. And not only did they say this, when I talked to Lynn afterwards, Lynn was one of the jurors. He wasn't even the foreman. And he was actually someone I thought was clearly going to be on our side. He was an older white dude who was a businessman. I just said, oh, this is going to be very bad for us. We broke into a business, took a bunch of their stuff. This businessman from southern Utah is clearly going to convict us. He ended up being one of our biggest allies. And one of the reasons is he told me he watched video clips like this and said, you know what? I just saw this little piglet struggle, and I realized I liked her alive more than I liked her dead because she's not just a thing. She is a living being. And they acquitted us. Unanimous verdict in our favor. And not only did they acquit us, the juror, Lynn Carlson, ended up writing a bunch of op-eds about how corrupt the government was by trying to convince the public, even in Utah, that there are no problems with our system of food production. So again, you have to break the law to make the law. And I think this is something that lawyers often don't understand. But importantly, lawyers need to understand, because lawyers play a very important role in this. Because if you didn't have lawyers like Chris and Stefan and Justin and the other lawyers on our legal team giving activists expert advice about how to navigate the corridors of power, how to argue convincingly to a jury, we wouldn't get these outcomes. We wouldn't be evolving our conceptions of the right to rescue or cruelty or that animals are someone or something, if not for the fact that we have legal professionals guiding us through the system. I say this as an activist and attorney myself, but also as someone who was terrified by my first arrest. And I think this is Chris's experience too. Well, the reason he's in law school today is because he realized there's grave injustice in the world. And if there aren't lawyers to defend the people fighting the good fight for a better world for us all, this world's going down in flames. All right, so here's the last question that I'll leave you with. And it's a very active question, because we are not just arguing these dogs are being treated cruelly at Ridgeland Farms. I showed you this clip before. I'm not going to show you again. We're arguing that they deserve legal rights. That when the Fifth Amendment says that you may not deprive any person of life or liberty, that should include, maybe not all animals yet, eventually, perhaps, but it should include dogs. Because what right do we have to cage and abuse and slaughter these animals, experiment on them, force feed them laundry detergent, inject them with rabies just because they were born to a different species? And so our argument is these animals are persons. Just as Susan B. Anthony argued that women are citizens, animals can be persons too. Because after all, if a corporation can be a person, if a trust, a set of documents that a dead person filed in some court, if that can be a person, then surely a dog can be a person too. And this is important because in the criminal law, there are certain defenses for rescue if you're protecting a person. Right? In Wisconsin, specifically, there's a defensive other statute that says if you're acting to prevent some unlawful interference with a person, then you're entitled, in some cases, to break the law. And this is exactly what we did just a couple weeks ago that led me to be jailed in Dane County, Wisconsin, because the authorities disagreed with our interpretation of whether animals are persons under the law. This is footage taken on March 15th of 150 activists going to Ridgeland Farms and taking as many beagles out as we could. So again, you have to break the law to make the law, but you need good lawyers to do it. So the sense of this, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a dog lover, whether you're just someone interested in the story, encourage all of you to follow our efforts to make the law by breaking the law. It's SaveTheDogs.io. Because after this action, where 27 activists arrested, including Alexandra Paul, the same woman you saw taking a chicken out of a slaughterhouse truck, joined us in Wisconsin just a couple weeks ago to take 30 beagles outside of a lab. But we've decided that we're going back again, even though they arrested us. Because if we truly believe that dogs are persons and not just things, if we believe we have a right to defend them, in the same way we have the right to defend a child or a human being, then we have to put our money where our mouth is. And that's what we're doing on April 2019. And something pretty amazing has happened. Not only have enormous numbers of influencers, celebrities, politicians in some cases supported us in this interpretation of law, including just telling folks about how James Gunn, the director of Superman and Guardians of the Galaxy, he's been supporting us and sending us money and saying, please use my name in this. Jane Goodall, the very famous animal welfare advocate and primatologist, wrote an op-ed for us shortly before she passed away. And increasingly lawyers too, including the clinic at the University of Denver, clinics at Harvard Law School, the University of California, have stepped up to say, you're right. The powers that be who tell you that dogs are not persons are wrong. And because they are persons in the same way a corporation or a trust or a human being is a legal person, you have the right to defend them. And in a couple weeks, we're going back to test that theory and find out if the authorities will agree. So that's all I have to say. Thank you all very much for listening. And